Good afternoon to all of our audience today joining us at this important and timely discussion on women's lack of access to justice in Turkey, organized by Set Them Free. We advocate for women's rights with a focus on Turkey and globally raise awareness on the violations against women human rights defenders and empower women and children refugees. I am Cemre Ülker, co-founder of the Civil Initiative and UN representative of the Journalists and Writers Foundation. Today, we are gathered at the CSW session with several distinguished experts to discuss women's rights and the rule of law in Turkey. I will be leading this discussion with Hafsa Girdap. She has been my partner in founding Set Them Free and also executive director of Advocates of Silence Turkey. We are right now live through the NGO CSW events portal platform and also Set Them Free's YouTube channel. Throughout the discussion, I encourage everyone to share their opinions, insights, and questions to any specific expert here in the chat at Zoom or over YouTube for us to cover in the Q&A session. Before we start our discussion today, I would like to acknowledge that we stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian women and girls. We will continue to support them in all possible means, all women who have been bravely defeating their nation's freedom since the beginning of this crisis. It's a tragic truth that at a time such as Commission on the Status of Women, UN Women's Gathering, where member states are meeting with women's rights advocates in partnership with UN agencies, we should be discussing the full implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 5, gender equality, among the other countless proactive policies, programs for women's empowerment. But we do indeed still have to talk about the ways to combat crimes of aggression. And I must also underline the universality of human rights. Crimes against humanity, different forms of political, social persecutions are taking place all around the world. Ukraine is only the latest. As we join our efforts to combat all forms of human rights violations and mass atrocities, we must take the same conscious awareness towards every country where individuals' dignity, their right to live in peaceful societies are violated. For the last 2 decades, women's rights have been in constant turmoil in Turkey. Repressive policy actions, derogatory public statements of high-ranking government officials, impunity against sexual crimes, femicide, and most strikingly, withdrawal from Istanbul Convention have set back women's rights to live and exercise their civil and political rights. This degrading social atmosphere and this shadow pandemic caused a dramatic increase in the killings of women. But the death blow hit the women's rights in Turkey as the country was being the first signatory party to the Council of Europe's Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women, as we all know as Istanbul Convention. Turkey withdrew from this fundamental, legally binding international human rights treaty. The groundless accusations were built on the fact that the Convention was allegedly endorsing values and norms against the Turkish family structure. But of course, Turkey did not end up at this stage of human rights overnight. To strengthen the rule of law, to realize the gender mainstreaming of the national constitution, fundamental incidents, the historical turnouts must be acknowledged to provide effective policy suggestions, calling government authorities to take urgent actions. Turkey is a state party to many international conventions protecting women from all forms of violence, promoting their civil, political, social rights. However, a strong political will is missing to implement such human rights mechanisms. Verdict of non-prosecution and impunity against all forms of violence have been some of the main reasons creating challenges for women to access justice in Turkey. According to the latest Positive Peace report of the Institute for Economics and Peace, there have been deteriorations in the level of trust in governments, press freedom, conflict between different ethnic, cultural, religious groups within the societies, and Turkey, unfortunately, is listed among the countries in which this domain decreased notably in the past decade. We will shortly hear from all of our panelists in more detail discussing different challenges that women in Turkey are confronting to get justice, protection and to defend their rights. But before all that, before we set the stage for our panelists today, would you like to add anything from your expertise, your insights? How do you analyze women's access to justice in Turkey?
Thank you, Cemre, for this powerful introduction and for introducing me. I'm Hafsa Girdap. I'm the Executive Director at AST Advocacy of Science Turkey, and I'm a scholar at Stony Brook University studying women's gender and sexuality studies. And thank you, everyone, for joining in such a powerful and significant discussion here in which we will share the experiences of women in Turkey in terms of accessing to justice. Cemre, I want to, in parallel with what you said, I want to talk about specifically on a report, a shadow report that was submitted to the United Nations CEDAW, the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and it was submitted in July 2021, if I'm not mistaken. It unfolds the drastic situation and problems women in Turkey undergo in terms of access to justice, discrimination and violence against women, and gender-based discrimination and violence. And we know that the regime in Turkey in the historical context has always been patriarchal and oppressing. Yet in the last 2 decades, it's also taken a political Islamist approach and discourse, which has expanded the extent of and form of violence, absolutely. And emergency decrees that was, that always were released after the coup attempt in 2016, they have been detrimentally been affecting women's rights. And in addition to that, they have been limiting the independent women's organizations. The withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention has made all these matters worse in terms of women's rights and gender equality. Moreover, women individuals, human rights advocates who are basically dissidents or critics of the state oppression, they are stigmatized as terrorists, and this case results in mass arbitrary incarcerations, which is absolutely and very closely related to women's access to justice system. And as I mentioned in our previous panel, which was called Women's Rights Under Authoritarian Regimes, the case of child marriages is another dimension of oppression and injustice that women face in Turkey. And it is stated in this shadow report that courts will allow child marriages due to legal proceedings such as adjustment of age, and a regulation allowing child marriages to be allowed in emergencies, leaving children's rights unprotected, unfortunately. And on top of all these experiences of suppression, violence against women and women's rights violations have drastically increased during the COVID pandemic, as in the global context. And in addition to the rise in domestic violence and decrease in access to resources affecting women in 2020, a legislation change was done, releasing certain inmates, including femicide perpetrators, including rapists, sexual assault perpetrators. And according to the shadow report that I was talking about, within these additional legislation measures during pandemic, judges were instructed that they may not issue restraining orders against perpetrators of violence using the COVID-19 pandemic as a pretext. And you may easily guess the ultimate outcome of this is that women who were subjected to violence couldn't take their cases, their issues to law enforcement or courts. And according to the We Will Stop Femicide platform in Turkey, 280 women were murdered, and that there were 217 suspicious deaths of women in 2021. It's huge. It's a huge number. In January and February, just these 2 months this year, there were 49 femicide cases. And you can think that almost every day a woman is killed by their husbands, by partners, by brothers, fathers, and oftentimes they are just stabbed on the street in the day, broad daylight. And maybe you wanna remember that 2 weeks ago, on the International Women's Day, women were exposed to tear gas and some were arrested just because they were marching for gender equality, justice, demanding the end of femicide cases, arbitrary detentions, and violence. And it's a dire fact that in the case of Turkey, no legal and social improvements have been done. On the contrary, Turkey is abandoning already existing laws, international conventions in terms of recognizing and protecting women's rights and fighting against violence against women. That's all what I want to say for now, Cemre. And I may want to turn to you. Maybe you want to introduce, our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hafsa, for your additional remarks. And it's important that you put an extra stress on CEDAW shadow reporting, because it's very important for us as civil leaders to be active at such intergovernmental organizations, that they provide this opportunity for us to share reflections from the ground, really, on top of member states reporting. So it's very important that we take every opportunity to raise more awareness on the topics that we're going to discuss today as well. Thank you. We will continue with Vera Güzelsoy. She's a human rights activist and a board member of several non-governmental organizations. After graduating from Galatasaray University Law School with her master's focusing on the theme crime of deprivation of liberty caused by the government, she took master courses in Paris and took French and African civilization education in Dakar, Senegal. Vera worked as a criminal lawyer at Istanbul Bar Association, passing the exam to be a judge in Turkey's Supreme Court Council, and qualified as an assistant lawyer by the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, France in 2016. After immigrating to the United States, she began working as a data scientist using artificial intelligence. Currently, she's a business solutions consultant working as an Anaplan model builder. And Vera will share her insights, providing us with a broader framework on the definition of pillars of access to justice and how women have been combating such legal barriers through specific case studies. Vera, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cemre, for introducing me. And I am going to share my screen to present. Okay. Hello, I'm Vera. First of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. As a lawyer who has been interested in human rights for more than 10 years, aims to be voice of underrepresented groups, and at the same time, a survivor myself of political discrimination, I would like to present to you the case of women's access to justice in Turkey today. So Turkey. First of all, let's see where Turkey is in the world. Of course, when I say this, I'm not talking about geography. Turkey is like a bridge between Asia and Europe, yes. But let's see where it is in the world in the area of law, justice, and human rights. According to the World Justice Project Rule of Law 2021 Index, Turkey is 133rd among 139 countries in terms of fundamental rights. After hearing this fact, let's see where access to justice is. How we define access to justice? Access to justice is not only include recourse to the judiciary, it is more than the application to the law. It is a multidimensional process encompassing all mechanisms necessary to resolve conflicts. It should be as soon as possible. An applicant should reach a legal conclusion as soon as possible. In the easiest way, those who seek their rights should be able to reach the means of application in an uncomplicated manner and being aware of their rights. And in the cheapest way, an applicant should be able to seek their right in most affordable way with less expense, and it should be reliably, believing that they will evaluate the process by making sure that there's an impartial and fair trial. And identifying and removing obstacles, it means that people to get what they deserve, and to do that, system should make necessary arrangements. Now we know where the Turkey is and what is the definition of access to justice. And what about women? Women's access to justice, on the other hand, requires special attention. as a separate topic, because women in Turkey and around the world are exposed to gender-based violence and discrimination. We examine the problems faced by women in accessing justice under these headings: economic, legal, and political. First, economic. When we look at the statistics, we note that women's participation in the workforce is only 30%, and besides this, women are paid significantly less for the same job. If we look at the statistics from Istanbul Bar Association, 95% people who had applied for financial assistance were women. Applications fees are not the only payment to access the justice for women. Transportation to the court, the cost of childcare, the cost of dependence care for the women who work seeking for permissions from their job. And because this is not just one case, it is a long process. This is why it should be more than one payments and several issues. This CEDAW, Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, gave special attention to economic barriers of women access to law in Turkey. Within this focus, the lack of economic independence, and unfortunately the fact that women are dependent on their own abusers and unpaid domestic labor, these are considered the biggest barriers of women access to law. When it comes to legal concerns, the most important thing is withdrawal from Istanbul Convention. Istanbul Convention set out standards for prevention of all kinds of violence against women, and it requires establishing obligations for state authorities to provide essential support for victims, including refugee women. Therefore, Turkey's withdrawal from Istanbul Convention, an unfortunate setback for women and human rights. The delays are another biggest obstacle. Simple and accessible legal procedures are needed. For example, an average divorce case lasts 8 years. How long is a person's life? And another issue is shadow pandemic. Since COVID-19 particularly, domestic violence rates has greatly increased, and there's a big legal gap to solve these problems. When it comes to minority groups, differently abled individuals are not provided with necessary support. Sign language, for example. There is a physical barrier to access to justice in Turkey. Mentally challenged individuals who are victims of sexual violence and then become pregnant undergo abortions without consent, or for some who seek an abortion, it may be rejected. Because of all reasons I mentioned, women in Turkey have lost their trust in law and justice system. Women do not believe the punishment to be suitable for further crimes. Political reasons. I personally think that the biggest obstacle in women's access to justice is political. Let's take a look at the World Justice Project Rule of Law Index. Here, the Turkey, for free of discrimination, in 136th place among 139 countries, just third from the last. And for free of improper government influence is 135th place, fourth from the last. It can be seen clearly here. The biggest obstacle in front of the law is that political authority corrupts the legal process against women. Last week, tens of women activists were detained due to International Women's Day action. They were just celebrating 8th of March and they are detained. Last month, journalist Sedef Kabash was sentenced more than 2 years in prison for insulting president. One tweet post. The successful academic Hatice Eke has been in prison since 2018 for no explicit reason, except from not aligning herself with the authoritarian regime. She speaks 3 languages fluently, an idealist researcher specialized in Africa affairs. She still continues to learn in her ward. to nourish her development, taking low classes in prison. Not a single one of her petitions about her station taken into account. All they are just ignored by the Supreme Court. Femicide is political. When we look at the right to life, the most primary and important human rights, specifically for women in Turkey, we are faced with a deplorable picture. In the last 2 decades, around 20,000 women's rights to life was violated. Among this number, it is very important, a high proportion is composed of women who requested a protection decision but weren't given. The withdrawal of Istanbul Convention, which provides the greatest legal basis for the protection of women, is again an obvious political choice against women. Since that date, more than 300 women were killed. With the presidential decrees of the state of emergency, around 200,000 people were barred from their jobs, and more than 6,000 of them were academics and 4,000 were judges. 3 young female cadets, Nagihan Yavuz, Nimet Ecem Gönüllü, and Şüheda Sena Öğütalan, they have been imprisoned in Bakırköy since 2016. They spent the first 6 years of their 20s in prison, and these young women were sentenced to life imprisonment just because they were students at the military academy and accused with thousands of other innocent individuals. The fact that mothers imprisoned for political crimes and approximately 800 babies in prison in again a political attitude of government against women. Bringing my case to the end, I want to draw your attention to 2 things. First, the dire situation in Turkey and need an immediate reform. The second is the access to justice is economic, legal, and political. I would like to thank you all speakers and CSW for this opportunity to enhance the awareness and shape global standards on gender equality and empowerment of women. I hope when we come together again, we will be coming together to celebrate and more. Just thank you.
Thank you so much, Vera. You put an emphasis on several different issues and all were equally important, such as women's peaceful protesters, how they were faced with oppressive police intervention, even though they were there presenting their right to raise more awareness on the occasion of the International Women's Day. Very delightful pictures. And of course, you mentioned about the challenges that women journalists are going through, civil society leaders are going through just doing their job in Turkey. Thank you so much. And before I give it to Hafsa, I see a very important question and timely, maybe not to leave it to the end. Hafsa, I would like to address this one. Joy is asking about the shadow reporting. So CEDAW is the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And when member states become a party to any international human rights treaty, there is a reporting cycle, usually every 4 years. Member states are submitting their status quo on how they do in terms of particular treaty that they address. And then any UN committee, in this case CEDAW, replies back, providing list of issues that they want further explanation from the member states. And just at this point, we as civil society organizations can give our own feedbacks, views, data bases, graphs from our own researchers to comply with the arguments of CEDAW. And when you Google it, CEDAW member state reporting cycle UNHCR, you should be able to access the all the countries list of reportings every 4 years, as I mentioned. And I will be more than pleased to provide the links going further during the discussion. Hafsa, please take it from there.
Yeah, Cemre, thank you, for not delaying to respond to the question. It's important. Thank you for addressing it. And Vera, I agree that, and from your presentation, I see that the problems that women in Turkey are facing, they are really intersectional in terms of the platforms that they are facing, justice, education, or workforce. and the ethnicities and the identities. So it shows us this intersectional, characteristic of the problems in Turkey show us that we have to address this problem through that intersectional lens to see and to solve the, multiple oppressions and violences and discriminations that women in Turkey are facing. Now thank you for pointing out all these problems. So now we have the parliamentary, the member of parliament in Turkey, Huda Kaya. I'm going to introduce her right now. And we will have our conversation in Turkish, and it's going to be, translated consecutively just at that time. Huda Kaya is a member of parliament for People's Democratic Party in Turkey. Having an established background, not only as a politician, but also as an activist, journalist, and writer, Huda Kaya has been fighting against injustices, including women's choices of headscarf, women free will, gender-based violence, and discrimination. For doing so, she has been jailed several times, yet she hasn't stopped, she hasn't given up. In addition to her human rights work, Huda Kaya has done scholarly work on Islamic studies, again addressing women's issues mostly. And she's the co-chair of Democratic Islam Congress and a member of International Muslim Women Union as a representative of Turkey. Hüda Hanım hoş geldiniz. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Yoğun programınız, Nevruz'un üzerine seyahatleriniz. Yine bizi kırmadınız. Çünkü siz de bizler gibi görüyoruz ki farkındasınız. Çok ciddi problemler Türkiye içerisinde yaşanıyor. Adaletsizlikler herkesi etkilerken her zaman bu tarz problemlerin odağında en fazla onun en büyük yani en sıkıntılı yönünü yaşayan kadınları daha da fazla etkilemiş oluyor. Cemre'nin, benim ve Vera'nın üzerinde durduğu gibi kadınlar farklı yönlerinden bu baskıyı ve şiddeti gerek etnik kimlikleriyle, gerek dini ve dünya görüşleriyle, gerekse yargıya, eğitime ve farklı böyle haklara, imkanlara erişimiyle bununla yüzleşiyorlar. Siz bir parlamenter olarak Türkiye içerisinde ve aynı zamanda sivil toplum kurumlarında da çok aktif, yerelde de çok aktif bir birey olarak neler gözlemliyorsunuz, neler görüyorsunuz ve neler öneriyorsunuz?
Merhabalar. Türkiye'de şu anda tabii akşam yoldan yeni geldik. Herkese, tüm izleyenlere iyi akşamlar diyeceğim. Eğer mazur görürseniz, inşallah hoş karşılarsanız, sunumumu yaptıktan sonra ayrılmam mümkünse, hani biliyorsunuz gerçekten çok sıkıştım programlar anlamında. Sevgili Hafsa, kadınların Türkiye'de hukuka erişim sorunları noktasında bir başlık, bir çerçeve olarak bana yansıtıldığını hatırlıyorum, yanlış hatırlamıyorsam. Şimdi düşünüyorum, yani bunun tersinden sorsak aslında belki daha parmak sayısıyla bazı örnekler verebilmek mümkün olur muydu? Hukuka erişim nasıl olabilir kadınlar açısından? Ama açık cezaevine dönüşen Türkiye'de toplum içerisinde yaşayan bizler için, ama duvarların arkasında kapalı cezaevlerinde yaşayan kadınlar için.
Excuse me, the interpreter is intervening. Yes, so thank you very much for having invited me here this evening. It's true that it's a very, very busy time for me, and I just came back from the road, and I will have to take off again, so with your permission, I'll have to leave after my presentation. So you asked me to come here to talk about women's access to justice, and it's true that in Turkey, we have many women who are behind walls, but there are also many people who are imprisoned who are not behind walls. Turkey has become an open-air prison.
Evet, devam ediyorum.
Lütfen.
Hüda Hanım, evet,
hızlıca devam edeyim.
Girecek, siz artık kusura bakmazsınız.
Evet, tabii. Yani hukuka erişim diye sorunları anlatabiliyorduk bir zamanlar, yıllardır. Evet, Türkiye'de her iktidar döneminde, her dönemlerde konjonktürel olarak mevcut iktidarın ve egemenlerin rengiyle çok baskın, özellikle de kadınlar üzerinden hukuksuzluk, insan hakları ihlalleri, kadınların sorunları, kimlik sorunları, dil sorunları, ana dili sorunları gibi inansal sorunlar, kadının özel iradesiyle tercih ettiği kendi giyim, kuşamı başta olmak üzere yıllardır biz bütün bu sorunlara alışığız ama şu an Türkiye'de geldiğimiz noktada hukuka erişim sorunları noktasında biz erişebileceğimiz hukuk bulamıyoruz ki artık. Hukuk kalmadı ortada. Artık evet.
In Turkey, we are used to this, of course. Throughout all these decades in Turkey, we've always come, as women, we've always been under pressure. We have never really been able to access justice. We've always been discriminated against because of our language, our identity, our beliefs. We've never been able to use our free will, really, even in the way we dress. So we're used to this. But now in Turkey, there's something that's terribly different, is that there is no justice to be accessed.
Bakın, yıllardır sayısız kadın cinayetleri, tacizler, tecavüzler yaşanıyor. Kadın katliamları yaşanıyor. Ve özellikle eğer devlet görevlileri ise bu tacizleri ve cinayetleri yapanlar çoğunlukla da beraatle sonuçlanıyor. Yıllardır kadın cinayeti davalarına katılıyoruz. Fakat maalesef bugün hukuk mekanizması dediğimiz bu mekanizma artık bağımsız, özgün bir yapıda değil, tamamıyla erkek egemen ve yani kendi zihniyetleriyle tekellerini aldıkları bir sisteme dönüştürmeleri sebebiyle özellikle iktidarın çevresindekiler kadınların taciz, tecavüz ve katliamlara veya herhangi bir adli suça isimleri karışan tüm suçları koruyan bir dava devam ettiriyorlar.
So we see all these cases of femicide, of rape and abuse, and especially if these femicides, these murders, and all these rapes and abuses are perpetrated by state officials, then especially then they're freed, they're released. We've seen many trials of femicide, and we see what happens. The justice system is no longer independent. It's totally male-dominated, and it's geared to protect men.
Hemen dışarıdan birkaç örnek verip cezaevlerindeki hukuka erişim noktasındaki sorunları ifade edecek birkaç örnek vermek istiyorum vakit darlığı içerisinde. Mesela bakın dün ve önceki gün kamuoyuna yansıyan Furkan Vakfı üyelerine, taraftarlarına yönelik yolda duran kadınlara bile korkunç bir şekilde saldırı ve işkenceler. Ben birebir kadınlarla da görüştüm. Furkan Vakfı'nın hocası Alparslan Kuytul'un eşiyle de görüştüm. Ve sabaha kadar evin içine kadar gaz bombası atarak korkunç bir taciz ve işkence devam etmişti. Yani kadınların orada nasıl meydanlarda ağır bir işkence ve onursuzca tavırlara maruz bırakıldığını görüyoruz. Diğer taraftan mesela bakın sabahleyin yarın Çağlayan Adliyesi'nde cumartesi annelerinin 700. haftasında ben de içindeydim, dahildik orada. 70-80 yaşındaki cumartesi annelerine nasıl ağır bir saldırı yaşandığını, hepimize nasıl saldırıldığını orada korkunç bir şekilde yaşadık. Bundan 2 yıl öncesinde hatırlarsınız. Hem saldıran onlar hem de yargılayan onlar ve bu kadınlar, bu anneler yarın da duruşmaları devam edecek ve yani ceza vermek için de her türlü fırsatı oluşturmaya çalışıyorlar. Diğer taraftan cezaevlerine geldiğimizde... Evet, buyurun.
Affedersiniz. I would like to give an example about access to justice in prisons. For example, yesterday we saw that women from the Furkan Association, even those women who were just standing on the street without doing anything, they came under terrible attacks. They were tortured. And I talked with several of them. And we heard that gas bombs had been launched into their homes, that they had been harassed until the night, all night long. And also, we also know about the Saturday mothers whose trial is ongoing, and how they were attacked in front of the Çağlayan courthouse. They're in their 700th week of protesting against government's policies. And we've seen these mothers, some of whom are 70 years old, 80 years old, who were attacked. And those who attack and those who judge are exactly the same people.
Evet, kadınların yıllarca cezaevine geçmeden önce, kadınların uzun yıllarca kadın hareketlerinin, tüm STK'ların büyük mücadelesi ve bedelleri sonucunda önemli kazanımlarımızdan bir tanesi olan İstanbul Sözleşmesi maalesef tek bir erkek tarafından, AKP Genel Başkanı tarafından bir gecede ortadan kaldırıldı, feshedildi. 28 Nisan'da, önümüzdeki 28 Nisan'da hukuksuz fesih bildiriminin iptali için Danıştay'da dava görülecek. Bu noktada kadınların büyük bir desteği, basının, kamuoyunun da büyük bir desteğinin olması çok önemli. Bunu da buradan hatırlatmış olayım.
So we had a huge success in the past decade. We finally had the Istanbul Convention accepted in Turkey. But then, just because one man, the president of the the general director of the Justice and Development Party, came against it, because our president came against it, it was done away with. And next month, we will have a trial against the annulment of this Istanbul Convention. And we need to remind that we need lots of support, both from women and from the media and the public for this.
Evet, biraz önce sevgili hukukçumuz da konuştu. Fakat ben de burada şunu belirtmek istiyorum. Türkiye tarihinde cezaevlerinin doluluk oranı en maksimum derecelerde şu anda. Ve ilk defa kadınların en çok mahkum edildiği, cezaevlerinde olduğu ve en fazla bebek ve çocuk sayısının rekor kırdığı dönemleri yaşıyoruz şu anda. Ve bütün bunlar yetmiyormuş gibi 2022'de hala onlarca yeni cezaevi yapma projesi geliştiriyor iktidar.
And as Vera Güzelsoy said before, this is the first time in Turkish history that we are seeing prisons being so full. They're so full of women. There's a maximum number of women who are being detained and imprisoned, and we've never seen so many children and babies living in jails. And still, the government is planning to build tens of more new prisons throughout the country.
Başta hasta kadınlar olmak üzere, cezaevindeki başta hasta kadınlar olmak üzere ve hamile olanlar, doğum yapanlar, lohusa kadınların bebekleriyle birlikte kelepçeli vaziyetlerde neler yaşadıklarını yıllardır kamuoyu korkunç bir şekilde kimi elinden geldiğince bunu gündem etmeye çalışıyor. Ama maalesef mevcut konjonktürel şartlar içerisinde asla beklenen tepki ve sahiplenme en zayıf şekilde, fakat bütün bunlar toplumun her kesimi tarafından fark ediliyor, görülüyor ve inanılmaz bir kadın dramı yaşanmaya devam ediyor.
And we have seen, all of us, throughout the public, throughout Turkey, we've seen these women who are in jail, even though they're sick, even though they're pregnant, even though they've just given birth. We see them with their babies, with their handcuffs. We all see this every day, but unfortunately, we've never seen the reaction. This situation has never had the reaction that it deserves.
Bakın daha yeni trajikomik bir örnek vereyim. Geçtiğimiz günlerde, bu ayın başında biliyorsunuz, Dünya Kadınlar Günü, 8 Mart Kadınlar Günü sebebiyle cezaevlerinde olan kadınlara 8 Mart kutlaması ile ilgili kartlar gönderme kampanyası gerçekleştirildi. Bu kartlara bazı cezaevlerinde el konuldu, oradaki kadınlara verilmesi engellendi. Sebep ne? Suça teşvik. Cezaevindeki kadın mahpuslar kendilerine gelen 8 Mart Kadınlar Günü kutlaması kartları sebebiyle suça teşvik iddiasıyla kendilerine gelen kartlara bile engel konuldu. Artık gerisini, yani oradaki cezaevi yaşam ortamları, suyundan, temizliğinden, hijyeninden, yani pedine varıncaya kadar, elektrik su faturalarına varıncaya kadar ve dışarıda çocukları olanlar, yanlarında olanlar, çocuk esirgeme kurumuna çocukları verilenler, hem annesiz hem babasız kalanlar, her boyutuyla gerçekten bir insanlık dramı yaşanmaya devam ediyor. Hukuk yok ki nereye başvuracak bu insanlar?
I'd like to give you a tragic, a comedic example. On World Women's Day on the 8th of March, there was a campaign started to send women celebrating this day, to send them cards to their prisons. But unfortunately, some of these cards were confiscated because they were declared to be an incitement to crime. I mean, when we look at the conditions that these women live in these jails, they have no access to water, hygiene, they have to pay their own electricity or water bills, their children are taken away from them or put into orphanages. It's a huge drama and there's no justice that they can access.
Hemen vakit tamamlanıyor. Ben birkaç cümleyle cezaevinden yeni örnekte hemen konuşmamı bitirmek istiyorum. Bakın son 3 ayda 3118 hak ihlali, kayda geçen hak ihlali yaşandı. Ve bu son 3 ayda cezaevinden 8 mahpusun cenazesi çıktı. Bunlardan bir tanesi Garibe Gezer isimli bir kadın mahpus. Garibe Gezer'in inanılmaz trajik bir sonu, bir ölümü gerçekleşti cezaevinde. Tacizden çok ağır insanlık dışı işkencelere varıncaya kadar bir insanın yaşayabileceği her tür korkunç işkenceyi içeride yaşadı ve intihar ettiği iddia edilerek cenazesi teslim edildi. Fakat ailesi cenazeyi teslim almasından cezaevinden itibaren defnedilinceye kadar, ki bu bütün mahpuslar için geçerli, işkencede yaşamını yitiren kadın erkek herkes için geçerli, defnedilinceye kadar maalesef korkunç bir müdahale ve saldırı, tacize maruz kaldılar.
I would like to give another dramatic example. We saw these past 3 months that there have been 3,118 violation rates. We saw that 8 prisoners left the jail dead. And one of these was a woman called Garibe Gezer. She was subjected to the worst kinds of abuses and tortures while she was in prison. And she died there. And when they called on her family to come and pick her up, well, they were brought under different types of harassment and attack until the day of Garibe Gezer's funeral.
Hemen son örneğimi Aysel Tuğluk üzerinden vermek istiyorum. Türkiye'de ilk eş kadın başkan olarak kendisi görev yapmış bir insan, siyasetçi, hukukçu. Fakat annesinin inanç ötekileştirilmesi sebebiyle ve tabii ki siyasi ötekileştirmeyle Ankara'da toprağa defnedildikten sonra bile etraftan yapılan saldırı ve tacizkar hareketlerle defnedilmiş kadını, 80 yaşının üstündeki annesinin kendisi kelepçeli bir vaziyette cenazeye katılmaya gelmiş iken nefes nefes, adım adım orada bu saldırıya şahit oldu, kendisi maruz kaldı ve 80 yaşındaki bir kadın defnedildiği topraktan yeniden çıkartılarak Ankara dışına, memleketine götürülmek zorunda kaldı. Ve Aysel Tuğluk daha öncesinden de ve en son annesiyle birlikte de şahit olduğu bu korkunç hukuksuzluk ve saldırılar sebebiyle şu anda cezaevinde gerçekten kişisel ihtiyacını gideremeyecek, tek başına yaşayamayacak şekilde hasta olmasına rağmen, defalarca adli tıp tek başına kendisini idare edemez raporu vermesine rağmen bir başka üst merci tarafından bu raporlar kabul edilmiyor ve siyasi bir kararla içeride tutulmaya devam ediyor. Bunun gibi 1000 civarında tek başına yaşayamaz, kanserli, felçli, yatağa bağlı, korkunç ileri derecede hastalığı ilerlemiş kadınlar ve erkek mahpuslar olmasına rağmen maalesef Türkiye'de gözler kör, kulaklar sağır, hukuk mekanizması diye bir şey kalmamış. Adaletin artık esintisini bile göremiyoruz. Artık önceden bir haksızlık olduğunda şaşırıyorduk. Şimdi hasbelkader bir adaletli bir karar, bir tavır, bir duruş ortaya çıktığında şaşıracak hale geldik. Türkiye'de şu anda başta kadınlar olmak üzere hukuksuzluğun, adaletsizliğin, eşitsizliğin, ötekileştirmenin en ileri derecede yaşanılan örneklerine şahit oluyoruz.
Another example is what Aysel Tuğrul has been going through. She was one of the first co-presidents in Turkey. She's a lawyer, she's a politician. And she was attacked when she was released to go to a funeral of her mother. And at this funeral, the person who had been inhumed, they had to take her out of the ground and take her to be buried somewhere else because of all the attacks that were going on. It had become so terrible. And this Aysel Tuğrul can't even take care of herself in prison because she's so ill. And the forensic department has issued multiple reports saying that she should be released, that she's too sick to be imprisoned. But it's a political reason. She is a political case, and she's being forced to stay there in prison, along with thousands of other men and women who have cancer, who are paralyzed, who are bedridden, and who nonetheless have to remain in prison. But in Turkey, no one sees, no one hears, there is no justice. Before, we used to be surprised when we saw cases where justice was not obtained, and now we're surprised when we see even a hint of justice. In Turkey, really, we are at the worst point of a lack of justice, of equality, of discrimination.
Bütün bu hukuksuzlukların, adaletsizliklerin ve kötü gidişatın üstesinden hangi renkten, ırktan, inançtan, düşünceden, ideolojiden olursak olalım, kimlikler üstü, tamamıyla kimlikler üstü, amasız fakatsız, gerçek bir kadın dayanışmasıyla, kadın gücüyle bu eril kötülüğe karşı, bu zihniyete karşı başarılı sonuçlara ulaşacağımıza inanıyorum arkadaşlar. Hepinize iyi akşamlar diliyorum.
But I believe that if we come together as women, as people who believe in democracy, then we can, if we follow a policy that is beyond identities, then we will be able to combat this lawlessness and all this injustice. Thank you very much.
Hüda Hanım, ben de çok teşekkür ediyorum. Meselenin benim az önce vurguladığım gibi hani kimlikler ötesi yaşanan boyutunu hem çok güzel ifade ettiğiniz bir açık hapishane artı cezaevlerindeki boyutunu, insanların yaşadığı hayatlardan örnekler, tecrübelerden örnekler vererek göz önüne serdiniz. Ve yine tekrar altını çizerek ifade etmek gerekiyor ki hukuksuzluk aslında bir hani istisnai durum değil. Dediğiniz gibi o kadar hayatlarımıza, kılcallarımıza işledi ki biz hani hukuku ararken azıcık böyle olumlu adalet mekanizmasının işlediğini gördüğünde şaşıran hale geldik. Evet. Dolayısıyla o dayanışmanın kimlikler ötesinde bir araya gelmenin önemini tekrar vurguladığınız için ben teşekkür ediyorum. Biliyorum ayrılacaksınız. Belki benim söylediklerimi çevirdikten sonra tercümanımız Cemre'nin size söylemek istedikleri varsa onu da duyduktan sonra tamam. Bu yoğun tempodan bir fırsat bulup o nefes arasında uçak biletinizi dahi değiştirerek bu programa katılabilmek için şartları zorladığınız için çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Gerçekten büyük bir savaş yaşadık.
Benim yüzümden ben burada herkesin huzurunda yine o asaletli hani hemen meseleyi çözen tavrınıza çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum. Bir saat anlaşmazlığı yüzünden aradaki saat farkından Hüda Hanım biletini değiştirdi. Bütün programını yeniden düzenledi buraya katılmak için. Ben tekrar çok teşekkür ediyorum.
So thank you very much, Hüda Hanım. You were able to come here despite all the problems that we had. You even changed your plane ticket and you have such a busy schedule. You made time for us. Thank you for coming here and for talking about how, yes, Turkey has become an open air prison cell for everyone and their prisons are overflowing and that we no longer have a justice to be accessed. You underlined all this very well with the examples you gave. And it's true that if we are able to go beyond identities and work in solidarity, we will be able to combat lawlessness and injustice. Thank you very much.
Evet Hüda Hanım, ben de şahsım adına çok teşekkür etmek istiyorum sizlere. Bir de zaten söylenecek her şeyi harikulade ifade ettiniz ama Birleşmiş Milletler'in Güvenlik Konseyi'nin özellikle öne sürdüğü kadın barış ve güvenlik ajandası var ve siz Türkiye'de bu ajandayı gerçekten yaşatan ender kadın liderlerden birisiniz. Hepimiz için gerçekten çok kuvvetli bir rol modelsiniz. Çok çok teşekkür ediyorum. Yani sizi gördükçe bizler çok daha kuvvetli, güçlü hissediyoruz. Herkes için, gerçekten her düşünceden insan için, insaniyet, uluslararası değerler paydasında hakikaten adil bir temsiliyet gösteriyorsunuz, örnek oluyorsunuz bizlere. Çok çok teşekkür ederim tekrardan bu
Başarılar
yoğun
diliyorum.
günlerinizde bizlerle olduğunuz için. Çok sağ olun.
Başarılar diliyorum. İyi akşamlar.
Sizlere de.
Yes, Yudanum. Yudanum, I would also like to mention here the United Nations Security Council's Women's Peace and Safety agenda, because you are the one who really keeps us alive in Turkey. You're a role model for us. Your presence gives us strength because you really embody international values and humanity. So thank you very much for being here.
Tekrardan çok teşekkürler.
Now I wanna turn to Miss Çelik, Şengül Çelik, and I wanna introduce her to you, to all the audience here. Şengül Çelik has been working as a researcher at the University of Mannheim, Germany, and she's an academic staff member at the Chair of Philosophy since 2019. Çelik obtained her PhD from Middle East Technical University in Ankara with a dissertation on ethics in 2008. She held the Chair of Philosophy department at Fatih University for 5 years. During the same period, she worked on a research project on contemporary Turkish philosophers. In 2013, after she was habilitated, Dr. Çelik started to work at Yıldız Technical University in Istanbul. During her time at this university, she received a research grant to study on abortion from intergenerational justice perspective. Çelik has given many seminars on women issues, rights, and participated in the 56th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women as an expert. Çelik's research interests focus on ethics, contemporary Turkish thinkers, women's studies, and human rights. She has published journal articles, proceedings, a book, and 2 edited books. Welcome, Ms. Çelik. Thank you for joining us. And I know that the MP, Ms. Hüda Kaya, just mentioned about the an open jail, whole country who are facing injustices altogether. Also, the situation, some sample cases from the jails, from the situations of women. And I know that you're gonna touch upon specifically the situation in jails. Now, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Hafsa, for introducing me, and thank you, Set Them Free initiative, to give me a chance to be a voice of silenced people in Turkey. Before I begin to my speech, I want to express my deepest condolences for heroic women whose death we couldn't prevent in Turkish prisons, namely Halime Gülsu and Nesrin Genç Osman, who died because they weren't given their medication, Ebru Timtik, who died on hunger strike for a fair trial, and Garibe Gezer, who said to committed suicide after being genitally, physically, psychologically tortured by prison officials. And I will present my paper in the hope to become a voice of unjustly politically detained more than 10,000 women in jails, with more than 500 babies and children and many severely ill or hindered women behind bars. They have been under arrest against both the universal and Turkish laws. Unfortunately, the torture events towards detainees or people in custody by authorities such as the prison guards or health staffs are not new. After the chaotic political event on July 15 in Turkey, the government became worse in justice issues. I will present only 5 samples from Turkish prisons. This will give a picture of how inmates suffer in Turkish prisons, but what is more significant about lack of justice is the reason why these women are put into jails. I will count some of them and you will see that None of these acts are under the conventional descriptions of any crimes. To send their children to the schools that were recognized by the government before July 15. To send money to the people in need via legal NGOs that were government before July 15. To have a bank account in a bank that was recognized by the government before July 15. To be a member in a legal unions that were recognized by the government before July 15. To have a holiday in a legal hotel that was recognized by the government before July 15. To work at a school, university, or a workplace that was recognized by the government before July 15. Now I will give a summary of my interviews that I online did and reached through the chains of people I met in refugee camps and their friends. I give each of them different names to protect their privacy. First, Ruby. She had taken into custody in a sports salon just after July 15 instead of her husband. She was 3.5 months pregnant. She had to stood in crowd for several hours, not given water and food. She could not meet her toilet needs for hours. She was shocked when one of the police came close and whispered to her ears that nobody can help her, even he raped her there. Then she was subject to this threat by other officers again and again. She was so scared that for several days she couldn't sleep. After 22 days in custody, she was released since her husband was captivated. But unfortunately, she lost her baby just after her release because of the fear she experienced in custody. 2. Pearl. She stayed in Çorum Penitentiary Institution. She was taken in custody from her sister's house in front of her children. Her child, age 8, also interrogated about her by the police during the police home raid. She stayed with 10 people for 5 days in a place appropriate only for 4 people. They were given no place to sleep. Their right to get food from outside was taken over. Even sometimes she had given no right to use the toilets, just like with the other 10 people in custody. She was subjected to reverse handcuffs, nude search, degrading and humiliating speeches. Her right to reach a lawyer and call her relatives was usurped. She was interrogated under the name of the preliminary interview, which lasted for non-stop 18 hours. Her health check was carried out in the presence of police and without a real checkup. The doctor looked her just from afar and signed that she was healthy. From the courthouse to penitentiary institution, the police took their arms by saying, "Now this is our show time. Let's hold them from arms and make our show." Then she was locked with the other members of the same trial in a little closed moldy room without heating system, where the Human Rights Commission has already given the report that no human can live there. They put only 24 beds, even there were 30 people. They used the water bottles filled with hot water to warm up themselves. Their right to read books, newspapers, listen to the radio, right to internal communication are all violated. Not only their rights, but their children's right to go out park room also violated. The children have no right to have food. They have to share their mother's food. They created a chessboard from the bottle caps, and those are also sized with their blankets that they bought from prison cafeterias by the guardians. They are not given enough food and clothing or enter any courses like other inmates. 3. Jade. She stayed in Elazığ Penitentiary Institution. She was first taken in custody for 5 days. Her toilet needs were not met when she was even in urgent need. In winter, no place to sleep or no blanket were given. The officers always used degrading and humiliating speeches. Her health check was held in front of the police. She was subjected to nude searching by hands. Her right to see her lawyer is blocked, and when she was permitted to see her lawyer, she could talk only with police nearby. They were treated differently from other inmates since they were known as against Erdogan's governments and not given the same rights like other inmates, such as the out-of-ward activities. No enough food, no enough clothes were given. They stayed between 15 to 23 people in a room with only 8 beds. During ward searches, their belongings that they bought from the prison cafeteria were all confiscated. A more embarrassing violation is that in Elazığ Penitentiary Institution, there are cameras just in front of the bathrooms, seeing directly the bathrooms like Diyarbakır Penitentiary Institution, which is reported several times by human rights organizations. For Emerald, she stayed in Bolu Penitentiary Institution. She was a master's student when she was arrested. In custody, they didn't let her to go to the toilet. She had the health check with police. She was subject to humiliating and degrading speeches. When she told the police that she couldn't be a terror suspect since she had never seen even a gun, the police replied her that he will take her to gun practice and dinner for hanging out together after the issues. She was threatened with long arrest time and her father, since her father was an officer. Just like the other 2 women, she had also nude search, even she was in her menstruation time. And the police wanted her to sit down and stand up for several times. In the prison, she got sick and she wasn't taken to infirmary for 3 weeks. She told especially the inmates who had migraine had suffered a lot since they got no medications. She told it was very difficult to reach hygiene pads from prison cafeteria. Even they wrote several times for the pads. For a long time, they couldn't have pads, and since they were permitted only 2 clothes, it was very difficult without pads to keep themselves clean. After she was released, she was bullied in her department since all the department learned her situation from the newspapers. Her photos were served in the newspapers. They gave the news not like any other suspect, but like a wild terror criminal with her clearly seen face photos. 5, Diamond. She stayed in Kırklareli Penitentiary Institution. Her case was one of the most interesting ones to show not only how basic human rights are violated in Turkey, but it also shows how the regime is dragging its people into a climate of fear and hatred. She is so conscientious person that she didn't tell anything about her wrongful arrest instead of her friend who has the same name and surname. Although she stayed in prison nearly 5 years under very bad conditions, she didn't tell that she is not the person. She explained that both of us were innocent, like others. So it was meaningless to talk about that I was wrongly arrested. She said, people's severe experiences pass in time, but what they witness causes much more painful traces. Her grief for the people whose rights are taken over and treated violently she witnessed during her captivation was really so deep. She was taken to health check with police, and what is more disturbing is the doctor also humiliated her and not check her properly. During her interrogation, she was forced many times to slander her friends and colleagues she worked together. Kırklareli Penitentiary Institution is one of the worst places where nude search more curiously happens. It was disturbing to hear that the police took them in pairs. They were searched nude in pairs by standing up and sitting down for several times. She had to stay with 14 to 23 inmates where there is only 10 beds in the room. There was no moving space, she told. Their right to read books, newspaper, have activities, all were violated. She was so deprived and wanted to see psychologists and sent lots of petitions, but got no reply. After 6 months, she met with the psychologist who was not willing to listen her. They couldn't reach hygiene pads in time, and like other inmates, she had to stay with her dirty clothes. They never get only enough food, but also not enough cutlery. Although they were always more than 10 people, they were given only 3 spoons. She told that one day an inmate who had hyperthyroidism patient went into tremor shock, and we called the guardians. However, instead of getting her to infirmary, the guardians put her under snow in prison courtyard. And we didn't do anything for her. She said the male guardian told with a smile on his face to the female guardian that this will teach the inmates not to call us again. She explained that after this cruel event, when one of us got ill, we couldn't call the guardians again. The findings of my survey are compatible with the human rights violations and torture towards detainees and people in custody in Turkey, which have been already put forward by lots of human rights organizations. The ex-detainees all told similar or even worse events that are underlined by European Council. What has happened and happening now in Turkish prisons is an embarrassing picture of cruelty. The year or the place change, but the inhumane cruelty does not. I hope international organizations pay more attention to the injustice taking place in Turkey as soon as possible to save the innocent lives in jails. Thank you for listening to me.
Oh my God, Şengül, there's a lot to say. You know, even hearing all these dreadful experiences is not bearable, it's unbearable. And I know I am a researcher who's focused on these, vulnerable people, facing that the trauma is also, causing a secondary trauma. And I can understand, I can hear you. Thank you for putting all this, stuff together to draw the international attention. It's very important. But, sharing the real life stories, true experiences of those women is very important because it's showing, it's demonstrating the extent of the violence or discrimination from very basic, violations, human rights violations, even being deprived of daily needs in prisons, to being demonized, dehumanized, to physical, sexual torture. It's really important to draw the attention of the global international organizations. Yeah, they see, we can say that they see, but sometimes seeing just is not important through the reports. Real life, true life experiences are very important to hear. Thank you so much for putting all this information together. Cemre, do you have any reflections upon this?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to note that there are 2 UN set of rules to protect imprisonment of women and their right to access health services, social services, the Bangkok rules that really puts a specific touch on treatment of women prisoners, and the Nelson Mandela rules setting the minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners, and all what Şengül today provided us really violates every single article in two of these sets of rules. So thank you so much. We have a couple questions coming from Zoom, but I think Büşra will have better emphasis on answering those as she has more field experience. So I don't want to keep her waiting any longer and would like to turn to her. Büşra Taşkıran has her law degree from Istanbul University. From 2014 till 2017, she worked as an administrative jurisdiction judge candidate. Büşra was dismissed by Decree Law number 689. Since 2019, she has been working as a freelance journalist, producing news coverage for various media outlets. She is also a self-employed lawyer registered to the Ankara Bar Association. As a practitioner, Büşra has an important first-hand experience, which is, I believe, which is a very great value to this conversation today. And she will elaborate on the biggest challenge of seeking justice in Turkey, lack of grounds for legal actions, and of course, verdict of non-persecution. And Büşra, the floor is yours. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz bugün bizimle olduğun için. Söz sende. Belki birkaç cümlende bir durabilirsen Başak Hanım için daha rahat olur. Bağlantında bir problem mi var bilemiyorum. Şu anda duymuyoruz. Okay, maybe we can start by addressing the questions that we received. Maybe in the meantime, I can kindly ask Vera to assist me if you can contact her, if possible. I believe there's a technical problem. She's dropped. Hafsa, I think we have very relevant questions here in the chat, especially to follow up Şengül's remarks. The first one is from Miranda, but I think Büşra is back. Let us give her a second or so. Büşra Hanım.
Hi.
Merhaba.
Öncelikle kusura bakmayın, toplantıdan attı beni, o yüzden
Hiç
yeniden
problem
bağlandım.
değil. Ben sizi tanıtmış oldum.
Hı hı.
Siz başlarsanız tercümanımız da çeviriye devam ediyor olacak. Buyurun.
Tamamdır. Öncelikle bu çalışmayı yürüten ve imkan sağlayan kuruluşlara teşekkür ederim. Önemli bir konu. Öncelikle şu bir sistemimi yeniden kurayım. Evet. Kusura bakmayın yeniden. Evet. Şimdi konu olarak ilk başta hakkın aranması önündeki engel takipsizlik olarak belirledik. Şu ana kadar da birçok insan hakları ihlallerinden Türkiye'de yaşanan bahsettiniz. Şuna değinmek istiyorum ilk başta. Evet, insan haklarının korunması, işte nitelendirilmesi, farkına varılması, peşine düşülmesi, öncelikle bir hakkın bilinmesi ve bir hakkın anlaşılmasıyla başlıyor. Türkiye'de bu konuda insan hakları noktasında öncelikle bir bilinçlendirme yapılması lazım. Bu bir bilinçsizlik hali süre geliyor. Bu verilere yansıyan veya görünür olan ihlaller aslında yaşananların çok az bir kısmını siz görüyorsunuz veya verilerde karşılaşıyoruz.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk about this important subject. Yes, so we talked about non-prosecution, we talked about the protection of human rights, but before we start to protect human rights, we need to raise awareness of these rights. We need to make people understand that they have these rights. What we see right now around us is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that we don't know about, and we need an awareness raising campaign.
Şimdi takipsizlik kararı dediğimizde aslında bu kararı alan kişiler, yani özneler hak bilinci olan bireylerdir. Ancak bu bireylerin Türkiye'de nasıl engellendiğini size öncelikle anlatmak istiyorum. Takipsizlik kararlarındaki özneler aslında insan haklarının gelişmesine ve insan haklarına katkı sunmayı amaçlayan bireyler.
Those people who come under non-prosecution are actually those who are aware of these human rights, who understand them. And I'd like to first of all talk about those people.
Evet, bugün insan hakları alanında Türkiye'deki en büyük engellemelerden biri yargı kararları. Burada yargı kararlarından ben sadece takipsizlik kararlarına değineceğim. Bu soruşturma aşamasında veriliyor ve bu soruşturma aşamasında verilen kararla savcı yani soruşturmayı yürüten kişi yargılama için yeterli delil bulamadığını ve bir soruşturma yapmayacağını ve bu ihlali araştırmayacağını aslında ifade ediyor.
So I'd like to really focus on non-prosecution. This usually happens during judicial decisions, when judicial decisions are being taken. The judge starts an investigation and then he says that he doesn't have enough material to investigate and thus that he will not prosecute the case.
Evet, ihlali yaşayan kişi ilk önce bu kararı aldıktan sonra itiraz hakkı var Türkiye'de. 15 gün içerisinde itiraz ediyor ve bu itiraz sonucunda eğer reddedilirse bu sefer Anayasa Mahkemesi süreci başlıyor.
So in Turkey, when you're confronted with a violation of your rights, you have a right of objection within 15 days of the decision that's been taken, and then you can take it to the Constitutional Court.
İnsan hakları alanında başvuru yapan kişilerin serüvenini kısaca sayılar üzerinden anlatmak istiyorum. Cumhuriyet Başsavcılıklarına yapılan başvurularda, suç duyurularında son 10 yılda %51 artış oldu Türkiye'de. Bu %50 artışı değerlendirmek önce istiyorum.
So I'd like to first tell you a few numbers when it comes to this adventure of seeking out your rights. The number of people who've applied to the public prosecutor's office has increased by 51%.
Türkiye'de 2011 yılında 5,5 milyon suç duyurusunda bulunan kişiler, yani suç duyurusunda bulunulurken bu 5,5 milyonun 2 milyona yakın hakkında kovuşturmaya yer olmadığını, yani takipsizlik kararı veriliyordu. Ama 2022 yılında 7,5 milyon başvurudan 4,5 milyona yakın bir sayıda takipsizlik kararı veriliyor. Yani Türkiye'de son 10 yılda başvuruların yarısından fazlasına takipsizlik kararı verilme yönünde bir politika ile sürdürülüyor.
So when we look at the numbers, we see that in 2021, 5.5 million people were investigated, and 2 million of these were not taken to trial. They were not prosecuted. There was a decision of non-prosecution. And then we see that in 2022, there were 7.5 million people on whom investigations were started, and 4.5 had a non-prosecution decision. And so we see that in Turkey in the last 10 years, half of these decisions have ended with a decision of non-prosecution.
Evet, bu takipsizlik alan insan haklarını ihlaline uğrayan birey ne yapıyor? İtiraz ediyor ve sonra Anayasa Mahkemesi'ne gidiyor. Biz bu veriyi, bu Anayasa Mahkemesi'ne olan başvuruyu yine veriler üzerinden değerlendireceğiz. 2020 yılında, sadece 2020 yılında 40 bin küsür başvuru yapılıyor Anayasa Mahkemesi'ne ve Anayasa Mahkemesi bunlardan 33.200 küsürüne kabul edilemezlik kararı veriyor. Yani insan hakları ihlaline uğradığı iddia edilen 40 bin kişiden 33 bin kişi diyor ki başvurunu yeterli bulmuyorum, içinde delil yok veya başka bir sebeple araştırmıyor.
So we see that those whose human rights are violated are always faced with these decisions of non-prosecution. We can look at what happened in 2020. 40,000 people applied to the Constitutional Court to appeal the decision on non-prosecution of their human rights violations. 33,000 of these were not accepted by the court.
Evet, ilk başta bahsettiğim Türkiye'de insan hakları bilinci olan çok az aslında bir insan grubundan bahsediyoruz. Ve bu bilince sahip olan kişilerin de yargı yoluyla aslında nasıl bu ihlali kanıtlama yolculuğunun engellendiğini aslında sayılarla gözler önüne seriyoruz.
So I mentioned that only a few people are aware of their human rights in Turkey, and these few people are actually faced with millions of obstacles to seeking the realization of these rights.
Aslında tüm dünyada insan haklarının ihlaline uğrayan bir bireyin bu ihlal için hukuki destek alabilmesi veya çok kolay başvuru yapabilmesi gerekiyor mahkemelere. Ancak Türkiye'de 2019 yılında yürürlüğe giren Anayasa Mahkemesi başvuru koşulları ile ilgili iş tüzüğe göre artık kişiler bir form üzerinden başvuru yapıyor ve hukuki yardım almadan bu başvuruyu yapması çok zor. Hukuki yardım alsa bile bu başvurunun çoğu zaman kabul edilemediğini görüyoruz. Yani ihlale uğrayan kişi aslında başvuru yolları noktasında da artık çok zorlanıyor.
Worldwide, we see that people whose human rights are violated, they can easily access situations, they can easily access justice to have their situations remedied. But in Turkey, this is becoming more and more difficult. In 2019, the rules for applying to the Constitutional Court were changed. And so to apply there, you have to fill in a form that is so complicated that you need legal help to fill it out. But even if you do seek out legal help, you're still not, the form you filled out is still not accepted.
Şimdi Anayasa Mahkemesi Başkanı Zühtü Arslan 2022 yılında bir açıklama yaptı ve dedi ki bireysel başvuru sayısı 66.000'i buldu ve korkutucu düzeyde dedi. Şimdi aslında başvuruların sayısının bu kadar yüksek olmasının, korkutucu olmasının yanı sıra Anayasa Mahkemesi'nin %50'nin üzerinde bu başvuruları kabul edilemez bulması aslında çok korkutucu.
In 2022, the president of the Constitutional Court, Zühtü Arslan, said that there had been 66,000 individual applications to its court, and he said that these numbers were frightening. But what's frightening here is not the high numbers, but the fact that the court finds more than 50% of these applications unacceptable.
Türkiye'de hak ihlaline uğrayan bireyin takipsizlik kararıyla aslında başladığı ihlali kanıtlama ve tespit ettirme serüveni Anayasa Mahkemesi'nin kabul edilemez kararıyla aslında artık hak arama hürriyetine ve Avrupa İnsan Hakları Mahkemesi Sözleşmesi'nce de aslında korunan etkili başvuru hakkının ihlaliyle sonuçlanıyor Türkiye'de.
The fact that it has become so difficult to seek the remedy of your human rights violations has actually now means that we no longer have the freedom to look for remedies for our rights violations. It means that we are deprived of our right to apply to courts, which is normally protected by the European Court of Human Rights.
Bu bilgilerden birazcık daha somut verilere geçmek istiyorum. Yani evet bunlar kağıt üzerinde veriler ama yaşanmışlıklardan biraz bahsedeceğim. Önce kendi yaşadığım bir olaydan bahsetmek istiyorum. Ben kanun hükmünde kararname ile ihraç edilmiş eski bir yargı mensubuyum. Ve ihraç edildikten sonra hukukçu kimliğimle Türkiye'de yaklaşık 500 kişinin yargılandığı bir mahkemeyi takip etmeye başladım ve bunu sosyal medya üzerinden yayınlamaya başladım.
So I'd like to now tell you about a few concrete examples, and I'll start with my own experience. I was, as has been presented, I was a member of the law, and I was dismissed by presidential decree. And then I started to follow the trial of more than 500 people who had thus been dismissed from their jobs.
Evet, 8 gün izlediğim davanın sonucunda aslında mahkemeye yeniden 9. gün giriş yaparken farklı bir gazetecinin veya hukukçunun takip etmesini istemedikleri için aslında Türkiye'de mahkemeler herkese açıktır ve herkes izleyebilir. Bu kurala bile yani bu kurala uymayarak aslında sadece sosyal medyadan da bu yargılamadaki ifadeleri yayınladığım için muhalif bir grubun yargılamalarında yeni savunma taktikleri üretmelerine katkı sağladığım gerekçesiyle gözaltına alındım ve darp edildim. Bu darp sonucunda...
I'm sorry. So I was following this trial for 8 days, and on the 9th day, they declared that they didn't want journalists or lawyers to follow these trials, whereas in Turkey, normally all trials are conducted in the open, everybody can follow them. But they said that I had been sharing what was happening at this trial on social media, and they said that by thus doing, I had been helping and abetting these people who were on trial.
Cezaevinde bu darp edilmem ve kötü muamele görmemle alakalı sayısız suç duyurusunda bulundum. Aslında bir insan hakları ihlaline uğradım. Yaklaşık hatırladığım 6. dilekçeme ilk defa yani şöyle söyleyeyim, Ankara'ya, çevre illere, merkez savcılıkları birçok yere dilekçe yolladım ve sonunda bir savcı soruşturma açtı.
So I was taken under custody, and while I was under custody, I was beaten. Once I was released, I made many applications. I complained to several authorities, and finally, one of the prosecutors accepted to take my case.
Kameralı bir ortamda darp edilmeme rağmen, tehdit edilmeme rağmen, kamerasız bir ortamda ifadem alınmaya çalışıldığı halde bu başvurularım soruşturma aşamasında takipsizlikle sonuçlandı. Takipsizliğe itiraz ettim. İtirazımın sonucunda Anayasa Mahkemesi'ne geldi ve Anayasa Mahkemesi'ne şunu söyledim. Tarih, gün vererek kamera kayıtlarını alabilirsiniz veya şu avukatı dinleyip tanık olacağını söyledi dememe rağmen bu deliller toplanmadı ve Anayasa Mahkemesi bu konuda kabul edilemezlik kararı verdi.
But unfortunately, even though there had been cameras present while I'd been beaten, while I'd been threatened, and that the fact that there were no cameras while I was questioned, my application to the courts was met with a decision of non-prosecution. So of course I went to the Constitutional Court. I gave them the date of where I'd been questioned, where I'd been beaten in front of the cameras, which cameras. I told them which witnesses had accepted to come to trial to speak up for me. But the Constitutional Court said that these proofs could not be taken in hand, and they said that my case was not acceptable.
Evet, aslında Türkiye'de sadece bir davayı takip etmek istediğim için engellendim, darp edildim, hakkımda dava açıldı, cezaevine gönderildim, mahkemeyi izlemem engellendi ve birçok aslında hak ihlaline maruz kaldım ve Anayasa Mahkemesi tüm bunları göz önüne almadı ve kabul edilemezlik kararı verdi. Bu sadece benim yaşadığım bir olay.
So yes, just because I was following one trial, I was taken under custody, beaten. I was unable to seek redress for my rights. I wasn't able to go to the Constitutional Court, which refused to take all of these proofs into account. And this is just my example.
Evet, cezaevine ilk gittiğinizde takipsizlik kararlarından bir başka örnek vereceğim. Karşılaştığınız ilk ihlal çıplak aramadır. Türkiye'de yaklaşık 2021 yılına kadar Türkiye'de gözaltında ve cezaevlerinde birçok kadın çıplak aramaya maruz kaldı. Bu cezaevine ilk girişte veya cezaevinden her çıkış ve girişinizde işte mahkemeye götürüldüğünüzde veya hastaneye götürüldüğünüzde cezaevine girdiğinizde çıplak aramaya maruz kalırsınız. Bu ihlale karşı birçok kadın aslında sesini duyurmaya çalıştı. Birçok kadın suç duyurusunda bulundu. Ama takipsizlik kararı verildi. En son Uşak Emniyetinde 2020 yılında 15 Aralık 2020 yılında çıplak aramaya maruz kalan 30 üniversiteli gencin haberini Türkiye'deki bir parlamenter bahsedene kadar aslında ve bahsettikten sonra birçok kadın yeniden sosyal medyada yaşadığını, utandığını, onurunun incindiğini, insanlık onuruna uygun davranışlara maruz kaldığını, taciz edildiğini ifade etti ve bu hükümet ve bunu yapan emniyet mensuplarınca yalanlandı.
I'd like to give another example. When you go to prison, the first right of yours that is violated is that you're forced to submit to a strip search. And many women have talked about this. They've resisted against it, they've made complaints against it, but nothing has happened. Finally, in 2020, 30 young women from different universities were subjected to a strip search. And a member of parliament brought this to our notice. It was talked about in the media. And once they read about this, many other women shared their own experiences on social media. They talked about how their rights had been violated, how they'd been strip searched. But unfortunately, the government and the perpetrators said that these were all lies.
Evet, bu ihlali açıklamalarının da bir bedeli oldu ve bu 30 üniversiteli genç hakkında yargılandığı davalarda üst sınırdan cezalar verildi. Bu yargı eliyle aslında bir ölçü alındı. Ve devamında Anayasa Mahkemesi çok fazla sosyal medyada ve Türkiye'de gündem olduğu için, açıklamalar yapıldığı için bir karar verdi ve çıplak aramaya maruz kalan bir kadın için hak ihlali verdi. Sonrasında muhafazakar bir hükümet olduğu için bu konuda tepki aldığı için şu andaki hükümet bu konuda 2021 yılında çıplak aramayı düzenleyen, daha doğrusu cezaevi aramasını düzenleyen kanun maddesine bir düzenleme getirdi ve dedi ki çıplak arama noktasında insan onurunu zedelemeyecek bir arama gerçekleştirmelisin ve bu çıplak aramanın da bir yerde önüne geçmeye çalıştı. Aslında var olan bir ihlali önce reddetti, takipsizlik kararlarıyla durdurmaya çalıştı ama kadınların mücadelesiyle Anayasa Mahkemesi karar verdi ve kanunda bir değişiklik gerçekleşti. Ama bu uygulama, bu ihlale maruz kalan birçok kadın da takipsizlik kararı aldı bu konuda.
But unfortunately, when this was brought to the attention of the public, it was the 30 young women from these universities who'd been strip searched had to pay for it. They were sentenced to even worse punishment than they would have been normally. But after that, these people went to the Constitutional Court, which declared in 2021 that the law about searches in prison would be amended, that strip searches would be done in such a way as to not attain against human rights. So first of all, we saw that this violation of human rights had been totally, they said that they'd never done it, that this didn't exist, and then they did a non-prosecution against the people who brought it to the public sphere, and then they suddenly accepted that it happened, so they changed the law accordingly.
Evet, yakın zamanda bunu mahpuslar yaşadığı gibi avukatlardan birisi de yaşadı. Cezaevinde müvekkilini görmek isteyen avukat görüşme sonrasında cezaevinin kapıları üzerine kapatıldı ve çıplak aramada yatıldı. 3 saat direnebilen meslektaşımız avukat 3 saatin sonunda çıplak aramaya cezaevinden çıkmak için razı geldi. Üzerinde herhangi bir suç veya not veya herhangi bir şey bulunmadı, tutanak tutuldu ve meslektaşımız suç duyurusunda bulunmasına rağmen ki avukatın üstü aranmaz cezaevine girerken üstünün aranması savcılığın emriyle olur yalnızca, takipsizlik kararı verildi.
But of course, even though the law changed, the women who had been strip searched, their complaints were still met with a decision of non-prosecution. Another example I'd like to give is about a lawyer who, after seeing her client in prison, was met with closed doors. They said that you can't leave unless we strip search you first. She refused, but after 3 hours of waiting with no solution, she finally accepted. They found nothing on her, no notes, nothing that they were looking for. A report was taken, and she made a complaint about this. But unfortunately, it was also met with a decision of non-prosecution.
Türkiye'de takipsizlik kararlarını bir de sosyal medya üzerinden yapılan tehdit ve hakaretlerde çokça görüyoruz. Örneğin bu tehdit ve hakaretler eğer hükümetten bir bireye yapılıyorsa, evet, sabah baskınıyla, sabah şafak baskınıyla gözaltına alınabilirsiniz. Ama eğer bir gazeteciyseniz, bir avukatsanız veya muhalif bir bireyseniz ölüm tehdidi alabilirsiniz, tehdit edilebilirsiniz. Bunun hakkında yaptığınız suç duyuruları ise takipsizlikle genelde sonuçlanıyor. Yine son zamanlarda işte 90'ların faili meçhul cinayetlerini yaptığı söylenen CİTEM isimli örgüt adıyla açılan hesaplardan yapılan tehditlerde, ölüm tehditleri de suç duyurusunda bulunmasına rağmen gazeteciler takipsizlikle sonuçlandı.
And when you make a formal complaint, then this can be met with threats. And you can be threatened on social media, you can be threatened with your life, you can be attacked, especially if you're a journalist or a lawyer. And this is what also happened to the members of the JITEM who were involved in the so-called murder cases, which were never resolved in the 90s. They were also met with decisions of non-prosecution.
Türkiye'deki toplantı ve gösteri yürüyüşü hakkı ve takipsizlik kararlarına da değinmek istiyorum. Vera değinmişti askeri öğrencilerle ilgili. Askeri öğrenci aileleri de Türkiye'de birçok eylem yapıyor veya yürüyüş gerçekleştiriyor. Bu eylemlerinden birinde Ankara'dan İstanbul'a gidecekleri bir adalet yürüyüşü düzenlemişlerdi. Ben de onun belgeselini yapmak için takip etmiştim. Ankara'dan çıkışın ailelerin izin verilmedi. Bununla birlikte aileler darp edildi. O zaman gazeteci kimliğim de vardı ve buna dair bir kimlik kartı da almıştım Uluslararası Gazeteciler Cemiyeti'nden. Bunu göstermeme rağmen kameram kırıldı, ters kelepçeyle yere yatırıldım. Ayağım kırılmaya çalışıldı. Bunu nereden anladım? Çünkü çok fazla baskı olduktan sonra diğer polis, bunu yapan polise bu bir kadın, lütfen ayağını kırma bunun dedi. Ve bunun üzerine o baskı kalktı çünkü kamera çekiyordu. Bütün aileler ve ben bunun hakkında suç duyurusunda bulunduk. Görgü tanıkları da vardı. Buna rağmen takipsizlikle sonuçlandı. Yani toplantı ve gösteri yürüyüşü hakkını kullanırken bir birey uğradığı şiddet sonucunda eğer bir suç duyurusunda bulunuyorsa takipsizlikle sonuçlanabiliyor.
Another example is when I and some other families and people were trying to use our right of assembly. There was a walk of justice that had been planned for us to go from Ankara to Istanbul. At the time, I was a journalist, and I decided to follow this walk. I was going to make a documentary, but the families weren't allowed to leave Ankara, and they were all beaten. And at the time, I showed them my journalist card. I showed the policeman my journalist card that I had obtained from the International Journalists Association. But despite this, they broke my camera, they handcuffed my hands from behind, and then they tried to break my foot. And how did I understand that they were trying to break my foot? It's that one of the policemen told the other policeman who had his feet on my foot, "It's a woman, don't break her foot." And it was all being taken on camera. So the families and we all made a complaint. We all had witnesses, but again, there was a decision of non-prosecution.
Evet, Türkiye'de takipsizlik kararları bir yana, yani takipsizlik kararını almak için bir başvuru sürecini başlatabilmek de aslında büyük bir cesaret istiyor. Şimdi aynı zamanda avukatlık yapıyorum ve bir müvekkilimden bahsetmek istiyorum. Savcılığa yaptığı suç duyurusundan dolayı şu anda hakkında disiplin soruşturmaları yürütülüyor cezaevinde. Ve bu disiplin soruşturmalarından bir tanesi infaz koruma memuruyla arasında geçen konuşmanın camı açık olan başka bir mahkum tarafından duyulması üzerine mahkumun şikayet dilekçesi yazdırılması. Bir avlu hakkı üzerinden bir tartışma var. İnfaz koruma memuru müvekkilim hakkında herhangi bir şikayette bulunmuyor. Ama diğer mahkum işte avlu saatlerinin müvekkilim tarafından değiştirildiğini işte infaz koruma memurundan öğrendiğini ve bu yüzden bir şikayette bulunuyor. Ve bunun üzerine benim müvekkilim adına cezaevinde isyana teşvikten soruşturma açıldı. Yani şöyle anlatayım. 2 kişi avluda konuşuyor. Bu 2 kişinin görmediği, camı açık olan birisi bu konuşmayı duyuyor ve bunun üzerine şikayet yazıyor. Ve benim müvekkilim bu kişiyi kışkırtmaktan soruşturma geçiriyor ve 1 ay görüş yasağı isteniyor. Ki cezaevi de 1 ay görüş yasağını verdi.
Another example is about a client of mine who was a lawyer, and she decided to take a complaint to the prosecutor's office, but then she was faced with a disciplinary investigation. And then when she was in prison, she was speaking in front of an open window. So she's speaking with me. We're both speaking, but the window is open, and another prisoner heard us speaking and filed a complaint. And my client was then accused of trying to provoke this third person to rebellion within the prison. It was totally absurd. And she was condemned to a month of not being able to see anyone outside of the prison.
Bununla ayrıca başka bir örnek daha yine 15 Temmuz nedeniyle cezaevinde olan genç bir subayın sadece mektubu medyaya yansıdığı için Ankara'dan Türkiye'nin başka bir ucuna nakil edildi. Hiçbir gerekçe sunulmadan. Neden? Çünkü yaşadığı hak ihlallerini suç duyurularıyla kaleme alınmadığı için, suç duyuruları işleme konulmadığı için medyayla bunu anlatmak istedi ve medyaya yansıttı ve akabinde de sürgün edildi. Şimdi Türkiye'de eğer bir hakkın ihlalini öne sürmek istiyorsanız, konuşmak istiyorsanız bunun da çok ağır bedelleri oluyor.
So you need really a lot of courage in Turkey to seek to remedy the violations of your rights. Another example is a soldier who had been imprisoned following the failed coup and who had been exiled from Ankara to a faraway prison in the other corner of Turkey because he hadn't been able to tell anyone in authority about the violations that he'd been subjected to, and so he'd start to share them on social media, and that's why they decided to exile him.
Evet, yasalara göre işkence diye zaman aşımı yok diyoruz mesela. Umarım yani şöyle evet işkenceye zaman aşımı yok ama yargı işlemediği için bu zaman aşımının da bir anlam ifade etmiyor. Yani aldığınız takipsizlik kararı veya kabul edilemezlik kararıyla aslında işkenceye zaman aşımı uygulanmış oluyor.
Başak Hanım.
We don't hear you.
Oh, sorry. In Turkey, we say, of course, the law says that torture does not come under the statute of limitations, but these instances of non-prosecution are also like torture, actually, and they shouldn't come under under the statute of limitations either.
Büşra Hanım, süremizi biraz açtık. 2 de
Tamam.
sorun var size yöneltmek istediğim. Belki toparlayabilirsek.
Evet, genel itibariyle takipsizlik kararlarına değindim. Burada bitireyim.
Okay, I tried to summarize as best as I could the situation of non-prosecution in Turkey, and that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Büşra, and you provided us very, very important insights on the non-prosecution and the role of, indeed, civic education on the human rights among society for us to be more aware of our rights and stand in solidarity where we combat such barriers to access legal justice in Turkey. I have a couple questions in the chat, and thank you, Şengül, for being so active, providing your written replies in the chat, but Bushra, you also talked about your personal experience, how it is very hard. It's a very long-term journey to get a response from any sort of legal body. But there's one question from Aurora Women Rights Foundation, and it says, does lawyers submit an appeal to the court or inform the Ministry of Gender in Turkey about the injustices that inmates are facing, political prisoners specifically? And I think Ministry for Women and Family Affairs is replaced already with the Ministry of Family and Social Policies. No more ministry specifically working on women. But can you very briefly talk about this? Are there any actions being taken against the violations that prisoners are combating?
Soruyu tam olarak algılayabilmem için bir çeviri yapabilir misiniz?
Tabii ki. Belki Başak Hanım'ın mikrofonunda sorun olabilir. Ben de girebilirim ama buyurun, açtınız herhalde.
Hayır Cemre Hanım, siz yapsanız iyi olur çünkü Büşra Hanım'ın konuşmasından sonra yorulmuştum ve biraz dinleniyordum. Affedersiniz, dinlemedim.
Çok pardon, süremizi zaten aşmış olduk. Ben destek olabilirim size. Hani kendi tecrübelerinizden de zaten ifade etmiş olduğunuz herhangi bir aksiyon alındığında yaşanılan insan hakları ihlallerine karşı geri dönüş alımı çok uzun sürüyor. Çok uzun süreli süreçler. Bu zaten insanı yıpratıyor yaşadığı ihlallerin yanı sıra, ama kendi tecrübelerinizden de bahsettiniz. Fakat sorularda özellikle hapishane içinde insanların yaşadıkları ihlallere karşı bir aksiyon alındığında herhangi bir cevap oluyor mu? Bununla ilgili birkaç noktaya değinebilirseniz çok memnun olacağım. Bir de zaten sanıyorum Aile ve Kadın Bakanlığı, umarım doğru çeviriyorumdur, Aile ve Sosyal Politikalar Bakanlığı'na dönmüş oldu. Yani kadınlarla ilgili bir bakanlık artık kalmadı. Eğer yanlışsam lütfen düzeltin. Bu konuyla ilgili belki çok kısa birkaç dakika bir şeyler ifade etmek isterseniz güzel olur.
Şöyle, cezaevinde bir insan hakları ihlalini aslında öne sürmek çok zor. Çünkü dediğim gibi bir diyeti oluyor. Benim 8 aylık bir sürecim olmuştu. 8 aylık sürecimde yaptığım infaz hakimliğine yaptığım başvurular nedeniyle tecrite atıldım. Ve bunun hiçbir gerekçesi sunulmadı ve konulduğum tecritte UYAP sisteminde tecrit olarak geçmiyordu. Bir yalnızlaştırma politikasının izlendiği bir koğuştu. Yani Türkiye'de eğer siz cezalandırmak istiyorlarsa bunu hukuk dışı yöntemlerle de yapabiliyorlar. Örneğin Türkiye, yani kaldığım süreç içerisinde gözaltında işkenceye maruz kalmış birçok kadın hikayesi dinledim. Bunların çoğu açıkçası suç duyurusunda bulunmadı. Çünkü karşılığının kötü olacağını düşündüler ve işte umutları da işkenceye zaman aşımı yok. Bir gün hukuk Türkiye'ye geri geldiğinde suç duyurusunda bulunacağımdı. Ama karşılaştığım başvuru yapanlar da ya tecrite alındı ya sürgün edildi. Pek karşılığı iyi olmuyor açıkçası.
It's true that in prison, when you encounter violations of human rights, when your human rights are violated, it's very difficult to complain against this. I myself, I was put into solitary without any justification, but in the UYAP, in the prison system, on the software and the computer, they say that this isn't solitary. They define this another way. They say that they've put you alone in a cell. But in Turkey, if they want to punish you, they will do it illegally, in whichever way they like. There are many women who are tortured in custody, but they don't complain because they think that the consequences for them will be very bad. But then they have the hope in the statute of limitations that there is no statute of limitations over torture and that they will complain one day.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bushra, for all these insights. I believe what you presented was definitely a topic of working area by itself. So we would love to have you again for another occasion to deepen our conversation on the issue of non-prosecution only. That was very, very valuable. Thank you so much. And Başak, thank you so much as well. I know we exceeded our time a bit. I appreciate your kind contributions. Maybe turning back to Hafsa for her very brief closing remarks. And we had one important very important point indeed about the security of such women, either women, political leaders, civil society leaders, journalists like Bushra herself, or women lawyers, women in judiciary. How about security? What happens when we stand tall against such arbitrary regimes, Hafsa? And being a dissident, maybe you want to share your own insights as well. Very briefly, let's touch upon this question and wrap our discussion up for today.
Yeah, thank you, Cemre. So in a very short form, I want to say that both literally and metaphorically, I see that people, mostly women, are cannot even go through the door of justice. I mean, there is a problem. There is a collapse of rule of law in the judiciary system, and it's not easy to access the justice system to be fair, in a fair way, to get to the trials, or this what was that, non-prosecution. These are problems when you enter through the justice system. But before that, I see that people even cannot go through the door of the justice system. It's unbelievable, both literally and metaphorically. I just want to say that it's unbelievable and unbearable. And on the other hand, regarding your question, I believe that personally, this is just a personal opinion, I see that dictators are consolidating their powers through the feeling of fear. Even if you are, fearful or you're brave, people are facing such oppression, such violence, such discrimination. So I believe that. So why we, don't we go up, speak up, stand up for our rights? People may think that, okay, I am a dissident living in diaspora, so it's easy for me to speak, outside of the country, but I am facing lots of different, I don't know what's called, trials, just filed against me just because I am speaking up abroad. And in one of the files that I could reach through the system, I saw that one of the crimes that I am committing is insulting the president of Turkey just because I say stop femicide, just I'm saying, and it's called, generating propaganda against the Republic of Turkey. So even, living in diaspora, I'm facing such kind of, issues. I cannot imagine how people are, going through harsh, dire conditions. I saw that Bushra herself, has just, faced lots of different issues. We cannot even imagine our minds, such, problems. So again, I want to highlight that whether being courageous or fearful, we cannot escape being faced such, or exposed to such discriminations and violences. So I believe speaking up, standing up is important to overcome them.
Thank you so much, Hafsa. It was a very insightful discussion. I would like to thank every one of you here. To our listeners as well, there has been many comments coming from YouTube as well, all congratulating and applauding the good efforts of all women who are gathered here, all women human rights defenders standing tall to protect women's rights in Turkey and globally in every part of the globe where frightful women's rights violations are taking place. So this was our last CSW gathering for this year. As always, we're very appreciative of this wonderful civil society platform provided by the NGO CSW. Both of our events were officially registered to the platform, and our discussions will stay on recording in both platforms, YouTube and NGO CSW as well. And it was a great pleasure for me to host every one of you here to discuss very important and crucial topics. So till next time, thank you so much.
Thank you. And special applause to our interpreter. She's amazing. Thank you.
Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.